Okay, calm down.
This is not, by the way, your first hunger strike.
No,
Can you
I
tell
hope
us?
it's the last.
Yeah, God willing. But can you tell us about your last hunger strike and the campaign that you were working on for taxi drivers, and what lessons and takeaways you're bringing from that to this struggle, if any?
Absolutely. I think that um, I'm the first South Asian man elected to the New York State Assembly, and I bring that up because growing up as a South Asian man in New York City, one of the issues that you're familiar with is the plight of taxi drivers, and you're familiar with it because more than 40% of taxi drivers are South Asian. The top nations of origin for taxi drivers are Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. And I grew up with friends whose fathers were taxi drivers. I grew up reading the stories of taxi drivers and seeing people that I loved in those words. And there is a widespread acknowledgement of the crisis that taxi drivers faced, and the debt crisis that was manufactured by the city of New York, that was created by Mayor Mike Bloomberg and then maintained by Mayor de Blasio. And yet nothing had really been done. And so when I ran for office, I said one of the things that I would fight to do would be to cancel excessive medallion debt. And so I worked very closely with the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, an incredible union headed by Bhairavi Desai, who's an inspiration to me and to so many others, over many months in a campaign for debt relief for taxi drivers, and a campaign to force the city of New York to guarantee the loans that they told taxi drivers would be their pathway to the middle class, but was instead their pathway to a life of debt peonage. And this was a campaign over many months. This was a campaign the union had fought for years, and it culminated in 45 days of consecutive protests outside of City Hall, protests which I were a part of and would help to organize, a civil disobedience where myself and 5 other elected officials were arrested, and then a 15-day hunger strike. And it was a hunger strike that said the city needs to guarantee these taxi drivers loans. The city needs to give a fixed loan amount of $1,234 a month, and not this bullshit that is a balloon payment, that is the fluctuating interest rates that so many taxi drivers were forced to deal with, and a pathway of actual real relief. And after 15 days of hunger striking, that is a demand that we won. We won a city-backed guarantee. We won a fixed monthly payment. We won a reduction in the average debt of which was $550,000, and we brought it down to $170,000.
Wow.
And it was an incredible victory, and one that I will forever be proud to have been a part of. And it was something that definitely serves as an inspiration in this moment. It was, I think the difficulties here are that the scale of this issue is larger, the pressures are greater, but the necessity is just as urgent, if not far more, in that we are seeing the power to give Palestinians life or to condemn them to death lives within the White House. And so if we must starve ourselves to illuminate the costs of White House policy thus far on Palestinians, then that is what we must do. And we do it because we know that this will increase the pressure, this will increase the awareness, this will continue the momentum. I do not have the naivete to think that President Biden is sitting in the White House and wondering, what is it that I think? But I do understand that the way that pressure works in our political system is that each action builds on the action preceding. And once we can get it to a certain point, it becomes undeniable. And it is each of our responsibilities to do our part to build this coalition and this movement to that point. And this hunger strike builds it in some small way.
And just so people know, I mean, it is, of course, the scale is not comparable, and this was a local issue as opposed to an international one. But this was a question of life and death. There were cab drivers who died by suicide.
This was something that it very much was life and death, because the scale of debts that cab drivers were facing were so immense that they saw no way out of this. And part of that was because the city had artificially inflated the value of the medallion from its true value of around $200,000 to an artificial one of about $1 million. And it sold medallions at this value, and did so while allowing Uber and Lyft to flood the market, a market where valuation was based upon the scarcity of the asset. And so it eliminated the scarcity after having already artificially inflated the asset, which meant that drivers who were already be unable to pay the monthly terms of an agreement they entered into just from fares pre-Uber and Lyft were now absolutely unable to do so with the introduction of competition that did not exist outside of their own sector of yellow cars, of yellow taxis rather. And so what we saw is a number of taxi drivers who took their own lives. I think it was about 7 actually taxi drivers who took their own lives at the very least. And these were drivers who would have been hailed as the symbols of the American dream, immigrants who came to New York City with a hope of building a middle-class life for themselves, and they were sold a lie. And that lie was leading to the destruction of life, of family. And part of what made it so destructive was that when you entered into a loan with lenders that had been barred from the housing market but welcomed by the city to operate in the taxi medallion market, you faced the risk, if you defaulted on your loan, that they would seize your other assets. And so there were very common stories of drivers who would lose their homes to the lenders over their medallion payments. And that was the necessity of this guarantee, that the city would guarantee these loans, is to say that if a driver were to default on the loan, then the city would be on the hook for it, because that would ensure that a driver's home is not up for grabs from a lender. And these are the kinds of things, the failures of city government. And that is a connection between this moment and that moment, is that that was the failure of city government. This is the failure of our national government. And I think we have to, despite all the urges to the contrary, we have to understand our complicity and our responsibility in the massacres that are taking place, that have been taking place in Gaza and in the West Bank. And that's why so much of the organizing and the agitation and the rallies, the words are Palestine, not simply Gaza.
Right.
It's Palestine because since October 7th, more than 200 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, some by settlers, but primarily by the Israeli military. And although the distinction between the two is fairly arbitrary, given that settlers are truly just an extension of the right-wing military, the right-wing government of Israel. And this horrific reality is a reality for Palestinians all across Palestine and all across Israel, and is one that we have to change.